Yes, people, welcome back to Albert J TV. This is my first episode of Live Stories, but before we get into it, let's hit the intro. Yes, people, welcome back to Albert J TV. First episode, Life Stories. So yeah, I want to do something a bit different. Got two amazing guests with me, broadcasting royalty I've got in the house with Callum and James. Firstly, guys, don't even think about it. Smash the like button straight away. I've got the guys' details going along the bottom of the screen, as you can see on the screen anyway. And I've got their Twitter handles in the link in the description. But before we get into this, guys, you should know what to do by now. And there you have it. Hit that notification bell. But before further ado, got to introduce. Is that my? Am I getting feedback? Am I?
I think so.
Is it me? Right. Let me. I'm gonna mute myself when I let you guys talk. So hopefully, I'll try and sort this out. But further ado, James and Callum, it's a pleasure to have you on. Wanted to get you guys on for quite a while. I know you guys are busy guys, so I appreciate you taking the time out to come on my channel. James, thank you, mate. Yeah, tell me where the guys can find you and give me a little introduction in terms of what you actually do in terms of the broadcasting, mate.
Well, thank you for having me on first and foremost. Great to be on. For people getting to know me for the first time today, my name is James Rowe. I am a football writer originally from the UK, but I'm based in the Netherlands. Been living here for nearly 15 years. And I started out in 2016 interviewing professional players and managers, primarily Dutch players and managers. And then that kind of snowballed from there, and we're only 3 shy now of what is the threshold of over 300 interviews with the likes of Jamie Carragher, Simon Barker, Danny Cowley, Bob Wilson, among others. And it's great to look back on a great portfolio. And Callum's football website, Football CXB, is one of my publishers. The Secret Footballer website also publishes my interviews once a week, every Wednesday. And you can find my work on @JamesRoweNL Twitter handle. And to Google the previous work from the last nearly 5 years, you can always check me out on Google as well, James Rowe.
Yeah, hopefully, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, can you still hear me? Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm going to sort my screen. So, guys, don't think I've had a power cut because I haven't. Otherwise, this would be a very, very, very strange show. But Callum, pleasure to have you on, mate. Thank you for coming on. Great to link up with you again. For those who don't know, I met Callum on when the Villa Together guys got us to do a Premier League Greatest 11, and I'm still not happy with that first 11. But you know, that's how it is. That's life, unfortunately. But Callum, tell the guys where they can find you and also what you do in terms of the broadcasting, interviewing, and the rest of it.
First of all, just to echo what James said, thank you very much for having me on the show today. And in terms of that Premier League 11, I'm still with you. Tony Adams should be in the Premier League 11, and we'll get our way out, but we'll get him in somehow. But in terms of myself, Callum McFadden, if you're not aware of me, I run Football CFB. So I set the website up in January 2020. Primarily focused on broadcast interviews for a number of months, then introduced some written content, and the idea that I had was I wanted to create almost a mini athletic, as crazy as that sounds, and to do that you need to have quality contributors. So in terms of the written side, I'm very fortunate to have the man alongside us, James, as the chief football writer, and James has really helped take CFB's written content onto a new level. He brings professionalism, he brings hard work, he never takes any shortcuts, and as we'll come to with advice later, there are no shortcuts, and we've been able to create a platform that has a very strong broadcast side. We have just under 400,000 listeners on the broadcast side. And in terms of the written side, since James has come on board, we're close to smashing last year's yearly readership in only 2 months. So we're making a big impact. We've built it from scratch, and we do this for the love of the game and for the love of our craft. And really, it's just an absolute joy to be with you. If you want to follow me at CallumCFB on Twitter, if you want to follow Football CFB specifically, it's at Football CFB on Twitter, and you'll see podcasts on there. You'll see written articles on there, exclusive interviews from James and myself, and you'll also see different elements of football there. We've got writers that cover different aspects of football. We've got writers who cover Belgian football, Australian football, the Premier League, football in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and further afield as well. So we've got a good mix and a good team behind us. But in terms of driving the content forward consistently, I drive it on the broadcast side, and James drives it on the written side. He's the chief football writer. He has one exclusive interview per week for CFB and an archive piece. And if you've not checked the man's archive out, then you are missing out. Some incredible work there, and I would encourage you to do so.
Yeah, guys, thanks to the both of you. Brilliant introductions, man. That's why I was glad to get you two guys, and I wanted to get a different perspective from sort of the football atmosphere of just blood and thunder and passion and Twitter debates and Instagram debates. So it's good to get you guys on. Guys, like I said, smash the like button, and like I said, follow these guys on their amazing journey. They put the work in, guys. Don't just see it for face value. These guys put the hard yards in. So please, stick with these guys and support them on their journeys as well as mine. But yeah, before I want to get into it with you two guys, everybody has their passion and interest for why they support certain football clubs. So we wanted to kick off with James in terms of what made you support Arsenal, and what's your sort of first memories and your favourite and your worst?
Well, I was born in Hampstead, North London, and my family lived in Bedfordshire, so we lived just outside. The whole family was Arsenal. I went to my first ever game in February 1991 in a 4-0 win against Crystal Palace. And I went regularly right up until the season that I emigrated to the Netherlands in Amsterdam. A lot of people watching me, knowing me, or people that might not know me, they might think, what's a diehard gooner as well as a good football writer doing in Amsterdam? Well, my football club changed my life. I came to Amsterdam for the very first time in February 2019 as a tourist to watch Ajax against Arsenal in 2003. And I was so charmed by the city that I thought, this is it. This is an amazing. This is the future. I went back home and I said to my mother, I said, I've seen the future. She said, what are you talking about? I said, well, I'm going to go emigrate to Amsterdam one day. She said, James, you've only been back 2 hours. I said, but just you watch. I said, this is going to happen. 2 years later, I emigrated there, and I celebrate in a couple of months' time 15 years here. And if you'd have told me that night in the away end, in what was then known as the Amsterdam Arena, if you'd have told me that you're going to go on to live in this city for 15 years and you're going to interview Dutch players and managers in their mother tongue, and you're going to shortly go over the threshold of 300 interviews with players and managers at all different levels of world football, I would have said you was mad. But it's about taking your opportunities when they come. And also, before the COVID outbreak, I was fortunate to fly back quite regularly from Amsterdam to watch Arsenal games, both home and away. It's a real privilege, win, lose or draw. But the club is a massive part of my life, in terms of going to the games through the years at Highbury as well. And every time I've been fortunate to speak to an Arsenal player and interview an Arsenal player, it's always been a bonus. The likes of, for the living legend Bob Wilson to give me 40 minutes of his time and to tell me how that 1970-71 team came together, and to speak to the likes of Kevin Campbell and Viv Anderson, who also played for Arsenal. It's always a nice extra bonus. Obviously, you don't search them out deliberately. It's something which happens naturally. But yeah, the club at the moment, we're going through some difficult times. And I look at the fan base at the moment, and I think that we used to have a fan base that was so intelligent and so on point. And now, particularly the younger generation of the fan base, Albert, they appear to prioritise player reputation, clout and price tag above hard work and character. And that's something that I worry about a little bit. You look at Leicester signing the likes of Son Jaku, signing the likes of Timothy Castagna. If Arsenal signed Timothy Castagna, Arsenal fans would have had a fit. But yet,
Yeah,
having
100%.
spoken to players that have played with Timothy Castagna when he was at Genk in Belgium, I've known for some time that he's an excellent footballer. The same with Dennis Praat, who spent time at Sampdoria and also Anderlecht. So we're just in a little bit of a sticky situation at the moment, and hopefully things will get better. But as the saying goes from the famous Bob Wilson, once a Gooner, always a Gooner.
Well said indeed. Great stuff. Callum, let me come to you. Obviously, being the Man United fan you are, I've got permission from the YouTube community for you to come on here being a United fan, but it's all right. You're on my channel, so you're all right, mate. So yeah, how did it sort of manifest for you in terms of sort of your love for United, and what's your sort of memories and favourite memories if possible?
Before I talk about Manchester United, this is obviously a channel that's very important with followers of Arsenal, and I just want to say one thing about the club, and I genuinely do mean this. I'm not just saying it because I'm on here.
Yeah.
Arsenal are a club that have always been a classy football club. You consider David Dein and what he was able to achieve off field. You think of Wenger and what he was able to achieve on field when he came in. I mentioned those two guys because they're in my lifetime. Of course, there's far many more greats, Herbert Chapman and many others from years gone by. But in my lifetime, the Wenger era was a big era. And obviously, I'm from Scotland, as I'll go into shortly. But I want to. The reason I want to mention Arsenal as a classy club is I've been lucky enough to speak to Charlie Nicholas. Unfortunately, not for an interview. I met him on a train, a Virgin train when we were allowed to travel a year ago, and he was sitting in the same carriage as me, and I didn't want to bother him, and I waited until we got into Glasgow 2 minutes before, and I said, Charlie, pleased to meet you, and I spoke to him, and the one thing he always reiterates about Arsenal, and I know he's a love-hate figure at times, is they're a classy club. Whenever I left Arsenal, they would keep in touch with me and my family. If there was a big event, an anniversary, they would invite me back. They would look after me. They would look after my family. And that's the way they are with so many ex-players. And that sums up what they are as a football club. So first and foremost, thanks for having me on. And I do have a genuinely a lot of respect for Arsenal as a football club on and off the field. In terms of Manchester United, as I say, I'm from Scotland, so my football background is strange. So I was born into a family where my mum's side of the family are all Celtic fans, and my dad's side of the family are all Rangers fans. So my mum and dad split when I was young. I grew up on the Celtic side, so I have a really strong affiliation to Celtic. I don't hide that. But in terms of Manchester United, my dad spent time working down in the sort of Salford area before I was born. So for me, United's something that was always mentioned, and something that would be mentioned to me when I was younger, and I would question it. Why does my dad like Manchester United? He's from Scotland, etc., etc. And he just basically was explained to me the Scottish connections. You think of Sir Alex Ferguson at the time, you think of Sir Matt Busby, you think of Willie Morgan, who I'm fortunate enough to do a show with and call a friend now. You think even in the modern times, Darren Fletcher, Scott McTominay's currently at United. I know he's born in Lancaster, but he represents Scotland. So there's always been a Scottish connection, and for me, it was just ingrained in me from when I was young in that regard. And as I say, my dad had an influence in that. But if I'm being brutally honest, the player and the first memory of Manchester United that helped me fall in love with the club was David Beckham. He was very popular. I was born in '95, so when I was really understanding football and not just seeing guys running about the telly, not what was going on maybe at 7 or 8, he was playing for United, he was scoring free kicks, and of course he was English, so when he scored those free kicks for the national team, I was cheering, and my family members were saying, hey, you don't cheer those goals, but when he was scoring them for United, I was mesmerised by him. He had a video game at the time, David Beckham Soccer. He had a jumper out at DB, just his initials on it, but I was just fascinated by him, and I wanted to emulate him whenever I played football out in the street or in the park with the iconic free kick run up. Never could master it, still can't master it now, but I had those aspirations, and I fell in love with United through watching Beckham, watching guys like Scholes, and as I say, from the influence from my family, it was a club that was just there and talked about an awful lot in my childhood, to the point where as I got older, I researched the club and I just fell more and more in love with it. You think of the legends, as I say, even Dennis Law, I've got his shirt behind me. I mean, he's an icon of football, and there's so many Scottish links that it was a no-brainer, really. And a lot of people sometimes saying, you'll get this as Arsenal fans as well, oh, it's easy supporting Arsenal, or it's easy supporting Manchester United. They've got big budgets, they've got this, they've got that. Now, I can understand that argument, but at the same time, you support the club regardless of who the manager is, regardless of who the players are, because you support that club. And we grew up in a generation, all of us on this call at the moment, where you back your club no matter what. And as James alluded to earlier, there is an element of social media now that think, I don't like that manager, I hope we lose this week because it'll get changed. I've never been like that. There's been managers at United, when I think of Moyes when he replaced Ferguson, I backed him and I was gutted it didn't work out. But I never went into a game thinking, I hope we lose to Fulham today so we can get rid of Moyes. Never. You support your club regardless. So first memories were watching David Beckham. Best memories, I know that's another question you asked. I would have to say personally, 2008 when United won the Champions League. I think that the journey and the run was very good. You think of the semi-final against Barcelona. Paul Scholes scores that absolutely wonderful goal. You think about Barcelona went on to achieve in 2009 and 2011. They really just were an incredible force. So to beat them was key. Then to face Chelsea in the final, it goes to penalties. John Terry steps up to win it. And you think to yourself, if you're going to lose a Champions League final, supporting an English side, this is the worst way to do it, because your rivals are going to beat you, and it's going to be John Terry, a figure who is iconic at Chelsea, and if you support Chelsea, you love him, but if you're at another club, you in a footballing sense dislike him because you think, I wish we could have a player like him because he was iconic. So when he missed the penalty, and then I think Giggs steps up, then Anelka misses, it was just iconic. I remember sliding in my living room carpet and getting carpet burn in my knees because I was just so excited. Pretty tragic, of course, as your listeners will tell me. But I remember just the whole excitement of the time, and it was just incredible. Since Sir Alex retired, it's been tough for Manchester United, but no club has the right to be successful every year, whether you're Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, or even down the lower leagues. No club has the right. You have to earn it. And the worst spell for me, there you go, David Beckham, Dennis Bergkamp, both players that James and I love, the DB connection.
Yeah, indeed.
I think that the worst thing for as I say, with United for me, worst memory, if you were to call it that, would be the Moyes era. Even parts of the Van Gaal era, because I think if your team is playing positive football and football that's pleasing on the eye, not winning, obviously it hurts you and it frustrates you, but you can maybe see a direction the club's going in, whereas at times under David Moyes it could be quite negative in comparison to what United were used to. Van Gaal's football was very side to side, which I don't think suited Manchester United, and James will have a better viewpoint on this than me, but I don't think necessarily suited the Premier League. Guardiola, you could say, has a sort of side-to-side possession-based game, but he also attacks the width and he gets players in behind, whereas how many 0-0 draws did Van Gaal's United have? Quite a lot. They didn't score a lot of goals at times, and I just felt that it was boring at times. The fans would chant, attack, 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 and those were memories that, again, they would be the worst memories as such. But even at that, as I said earlier, I say worst lightly because at the end of the day, watching Manchester United, it can be frustrating as it can be with any club, but I just love football, and watching football is an honour. So although they weren't great memories to watch under those managers, the fact I've got a football club to follow and support means a lot, because you look at the fans of Bury, you look at the fans of Macclesfield who, yes, they're bouncing back as Phoenix clubs, but part of what they grew up with has been ripped away from them through no fault of their own. So I do see myself as being very lucky that I follow a club that mean a lot to so many people, mean a lot to me, and are still here in the form that they started in, because at the end of the day, sadly, not everyone can say that these days.
No, James and Callum, brilliant stuff, man. Memories. For me, quickly, I've touched on it before on my content, but I mean, I'm lucky enough as an Arsenal fan that I remember life before Arsene Wenger. So I absolutely loved George Graham, to be honest with you. Obviously, I respect Arsene Wenger. They're a long time. James, with me, I was unlucky enough. I wasn't fortunate enough, should I say, sorry, to experience the Highbury years. So that's one regret I do have, and I don't have many regrets in my life. But when I was sort of a bit more self-sufficient to know more about football and to go to games and to get tickets. Then sort of my journey started through the last 16, 17 years of the Emirates era. So yeah, I mean, you know, people always ask me about my favorite memory, and it's not the most obvious ones in terms of the, you know, the Invincibles. And I love the double winning side in 97, 98, because some of the football we played, I think personally, was champagne football. 10 points behind United at February. We pulled it back, went on a 10-game unbeaten run, I think it was. But my best memory, actually, believe it or not, is our last European trophy, James, mate, 94, because it's been such a long time. And it's a travesty as Arsenal. Yeah. Go on, mate. Sorry.
It is. And, you know, that for me is right up there with my fondest memories because of the whole journey. I was a young schoolboy. You didn't have a lot of football on TV, but that whole journey and the teams that we beat on the way, you know, English clubs were recently banned from Europe and we went to Belgium and won 7-1. And then, you know, to get in that semi-final, obviously Paris Saint-Germain, and then, of course, the final where Nevio Scala's Parma, the equivalent of facing in their prime Barcelona today, we stood no chance. Yeah, and the 100%. Way that everybody came together and fought like lions in the way that we did it, and we haven't won a European trophy since. And I used to prioritise European games. I still do, obviously, before the COVID outbreak. And I've seen a lot of Arsenal in the Europa League, you know, recently with Standard Liège and Frankfurt last season and the likes of Ostersund's, Napoli and Rennes. And I would go to the Emirates and I would get the impression that everyone would say, they're just a pub team. But if you actually know your onions and you know what you're talking about, you realise that they're anything but. But unfortunately, some of the fan base, if it's not Real Madrid, Bayern Munich or Barcelona, they're not interested. And in terms of fantastic memories, I'd say that 94 was extremely special for me. You touched on the vintage double of 98, you know, especially when that goal went in of Adams. If it's like fairy tale, really. Someone who is Mr. Arsenal, you know, who's meant so much to the club, who loves the club, to seal it in that fashion was just amazing. If you're talking about worst memories, it's got to be the Champions League final in 06. And then, you know, we were 14 minutes away from winning our first ever European Cup. And, you know, what do you do in 14 minutes? You might make a cup of tea, you might go out for a jog, you might go out for a walk, and 14 minutes. And for me as well, I'll never forget watching that game with family and seeing Robert Pires come off. I couldn't believe it. I said, of all the players to take off, you take off Robert Pires. And the same with Bergkamp as well. The greatest Arsenal player I have ever seen gets to play no part in our most important game in our history. And if you look at the other bench with Frank Rijkaard bringing on Larsen and changing that game, if only we could have counteracted that or been a little bit proactive. And in the case of Bergkamp as well, I'm fortunate to live in his home city. I was always used to hearing him speak in English. When you hear him speaking in Dutch, it's a master, a complete maestro. I was fortunate enough to interview his nephew, Roland Bergkamp, who played for Excelsior Rotterdam and Brighton in 2017. He was playing for RKC Waalwijk at the time, and he invited me to the stadium to speak to him. And obviously the interview was about Roland. It wasn't about Dennis. But he gave me 40 minutes of his time, and we had a cup of tea and a chat. And I said to him, this interview is of course about you. I said, but I've got to ask you about your uncle. I said, you know, he's one of the finest players of his generation. You know, did he ever give you any advice or any encouragement in your own professional career? He said, well, James, to be honest, I didn't see him very much. He said, but I became an Arsenal fan. I would watch him play, and you wouldn't see him for 60 minutes, but he'd be the one that would provide the pass. He'd be the one that would score the goal. And 11 years of service. And here in the Netherlands, Albert, you don't hear a peep out of him. You really don't. Obviously, before COVID, there would be charity days where he'd give like a short interview. But, you know, just an amazing, amazing footballer. And for fans that are hearing me for the first time today, I'll give you a little bit of a fact. The young Dennis Bergkamp harboured ambitions to be a physiotherapist. And his parents were really big on his studies. They said, you know, we want you to succeed in football, but you've got to do your studies. And he thought that he could combine becoming a physiotherapist with professional football. But having debuted for Ajax at the age of 17, he soon realised that it wasn't possible. But he still tried his very best. And he's just an amazing footballer. And when I think of the likes of, obviously, Thierry Henry, when I was a kid, Paul Merson was my hero. he was, when my formative years as a gooner, Paul Merson, even in the playground at school, you shoot him from distance, and when it goes in, you're doing the Paul Merson celebration. I also did the drink celebration a fair few times to the stranger looks of people in the supermarket and people at family gatherings when I'd score goals in the garden. But he was my hero when I was a kid, and he still remains one of the greatest Arsenal players I've ever seen, because I see a lot of people slagging him off and having a go at him, but those people that criticise Paul Merson, you can bet your bottom dollar, Albert and Callum, that none of them saw him play for Arsenal. You can bet your bottom dollar, because if you saw him play for Arsenal, you wouldn't say the things they've said. And he's always truthful and he's always on point. And one of my favourite top 3 gunners, I believe.
Yeah, guys, this is fantastic insight, man. It's good to get your sort of perspective of your memories of the respective clubs, and why you feel so passionate about them, and the joy they've brought to you, and sometimes misery as well, by the way. But yeah, I want to sort of ask you guys, going to kick off with the next guys in the chat. Thank you for your interaction. It's brilliant. I'm going to give you a warning if you want to get some questions into James and Callum. So apologies if I sort of whiz through, but yeah, so I'm going to kick off with Callum. What sort of got you into the broadcasting, writing, and interviewing? Was there let me add a bit of context to it. Was any family influence or form of education you took, or any courses you took? Just give people an insight as to what got you into it, mate.
Great question. And in terms of family members, I've never had a family member that's worked in media or broadcasting or anything like that. So the influence, I would say, from family was the shared love of football. Even my mum, who's not the biggest football fan, would take me to Morton matches, my local club, when I was younger, and she's someone who's grown to like football over the years. But in terms of my route, when I was 14, when we were at high school or secondary school, I don't know what you maybe call it in England and the Netherlands respectively, but secondary school, we got to what we called year 4 or 4th year. So I was 14 at the time, and you had to go on a work experience. So I asked to go to my local newspaper, and they said no, because they didn't have the capacity, because it was October time and it was quite a busy period for them. So I went to a local publishing sort of charity, and I worked on a book called We Are Morton about my local club when I was 14. So interviewed kids at local schools for the week I was with them. And I got to go to the Scottish Cup 3rd round draw, which Morton were going to be drawn in. And that day I met Sean Maloney, who obviously is a Belgian assistant manager now. He was at Celtic at the time. And I met another guy there that day called John Hughes, who's now the manager of Ross County in Scotland, but he was a Celtic player in the 90s, and both of them were doing the draw together. And I remember that day getting to speak to them and ask them questions, and having that burning desire. At the age of 14, I knew then it was very unrealistic that I was going to be a footballer. I was a decent player at boys' club level, but I'm not one of these people that will come on and pretend I was, if it wasn't for my sore knee, I'd have been a pro. Never. I've
heard that before. I've said a lot of times, yeah.
I've never claimed I was that good. But as I say, that day I just had a real passion. I've always loved football, but I never thought I would get the chance to speak to anyone within it. So that was a big moment. I wanted to go into sports journalism and broadcasting when I left secondary school at 17. A lot of people said to me, "You've got the qualifications, but do you know anyone in the industry? Are you going to study for 4 years at university, pay student loans, etc., and then not get a job? Is it worth the risk?" So at the time, I listened to them, that advice from family and friends, and I went to Glasgow University to study education, and I'm a qualified teacher. So I taught when I left university for 4 years. I changed job in the summer to a completely different role within education, which is different to what I have been doing, but I'm enjoying it. And that passion for football and broadcasting's always been there. I've always been inspired by people like Mark Chapman. I think he's perfect at what he does, Match of the Day 2 and the Monday Night Club, because he lets people speak, and as a host, he doesn't dominate. He comes in when he has to. I've always liked Kevin Day, who was on Match of the Day 2, travelling with the fans up and down the country. Andy Mitten from a Manchester United perspective. Andy's an encyclopedia of knowledge. So he's someone that inspired me. And also Patrick Barclay, as a journalist from the written side, inspired me. So I've always looked up to people within the industry that I've liked. And when we went into 2020, I didn't think there would be a lockdown or anything like that. Of course I didn't. So I set the platform up, and my first ever interview was with Christian Naddy. And how I arranged the interview was I'd set up a Twitter profile for Football CFB, and I just sent his DMs were open, so I sent him a polite DM saying, "Hi Christian, my name is Callum McFadden. I work full time in education, but I would like to start. I've started this football website, and I would love to interview a professional player. I appreciate that you're very busy, but I look forward to hearing from you soon." So I never expected to hear back from him because I had no track record. Nobody had a clue who I was, of course, other than close friends and family. And to be fair, and to his credit, he came back straight away saying, "Hi Callum, this sounds like an exciting thing that you've created. Call me on Thursday and we can speak for an hour." So we arranged the interview, I spoke to him, I put it out as a podcast, and it just sparked that passion. From there, I then spoke to Robbie Crawford, who his brother worked with me in a previous job. So he said, if you need help, Robbie will help you out and give you an interview. So I spoke to Robbie Crawford, who obviously played at Rangers. He's now playing for Charleston Battery in America, and his story was fascinating. And from there, I thought to myself, I'm really enjoying this. I want to continue on this journey. Obviously, I've got a full-time job out with what I do, but this is a passion and something I really want to make work. So I just literally devoted all my spare time to it, weekends, evenings, sometimes recording 4 or 5 interviews in one night or over the weekend. As James said, I went to some places in Scotland that maybe lots of Scottish people wouldn't go unless they'd family there. I went to the house of Michael Tidser, a player that was at Morton, my local club. I went to the house of Gordon Young, who's the Clovis Rangers assistant manager, and he used to be in charge of Sheffield United's youth setup. And they stay in Lanarkshire, and this was obviously before lockdown. And both of them said, "Yeah, you can. If you manage to come up to where we live, we'll give you an interview." So, as James said, with the stories going to the stadiums, that's what I done. I went up, spoke to them about their careers, and when I was speaking to them face to face, I thought to myself, and I don't mean this in an arrogant way, I just thought to myself, I think I'm okay at this. I think I can create a connection with somebody where they'll speak to me and answer the questions in a respectful way. So I thought, I really want to make the most of this, and I really want to give this my all. So from there, kept putting the hours in, kept, as James said, naturally coming across people that I wanted to speak to. And the lockdown kicked in, and with the lockdown came free time for so many people that maybe otherwise would have been busy. So from there, I spoke to Matt Letizia, I spoke to a few others, and the big hinge point for me was speaking to Joey Barton. He was Fleetwood manager at the time.
Wow. Okay.
He'd been asked for 2 years to speak about Rangers and his time in Scotland, and he was offered a lot of money to do it, and he'd always said no. But he agreed to speak to me. He spoke to me about it. From there, the podcast and my work trended in 56 countries around the globe. It made the newspapers in Scotland, England, and in other places as well. With some of the quotes, it was the lead story in TalkSport with Jim White. And from there, it just completely, everything changed to the point where if I approached someone for an interview, they would say, "Yeah, I know who you are, I want to do it." Or someone would say, "Oh, have you interviewed him yet? I think he would enjoy speaking to you." So things changed for me following that interview. And as James said, when he started, he never thought he'd be doing this 5 years later with hundreds of interviews behind him. And I can safely say in my book as well, when I started in January 2020, I never thought I'd be sitting here just 14 months later with 300 interviews myself and thinking, wow, this is something that I love doing and is going well. So in terms of my journey, I don't have any journalism qualification. I didn't study journalism. I literally have got an education degree, set up my own platform, and then it's organically grown from there. I don't have a budget. I don't have sponsorship or anything behind me in terms of the mic and stuff that I've bought myself. And I know you're the same, Albert, and you work incredibly hard to make the most of what you've got. James, yourself, and I, we might not have big budgets and companies that can back us, but what we all do, all three of us, and others out there, great content creators as well, what we do is we make the most of what we have got. We've got time, we've got determination, and we've got a work ethic, and we can do that, and that'll take us places as it has with all three of us. So for me, that's the way my journeys went so far, and And as I say, if you asked me a year ago, would I be on a show like this speaking to yourself and James? Would I be lucky enough to call people like yourself and James friends? Then I would have laughed and said, no, nobody will listen to my show, and it'll probably finish 2 episodes in. But here we are a year later, and I'm here speaking to guys like you. So it's been an incredible journey, and it really does mean a lot. And everyone that listens, reads an article, messages myself, James, or any of the writers on Twitter, it means an awful lot to me, because without listeners and readerships, we wouldn't grow and we wouldn't be able to do this. So as much as I've worked hard and James has worked hard and you've worked hard, of course, the people that support us with their readership and their listenership, we need to thank them as well, because without them, we wouldn't be doing this. So I owe a big thank you to them as well.
Callum, fantastic, mate. Callum, before I come to James, guys in the chat, thank you for watching the live stream, the content. Smash the like button if you haven't already, and like I said, follow my esteemed guests on their social media, which will take you to the links in their bios. So please go and check them out. Make that a must. But yeah, before I come to James, Callum, I want to quickly ask you, sorry, about what you said. When you met when you interviewed Jay Barton, he's a very complex character. I'll say that. What did you make of him when you met him, and sort of what you kind of had a preconceived idea before? And when you sat there in front of him, or wherever you did the interview, what did you make of him?
Honestly, I know some people will have that preconceived idea.
Yeah.
Joey's one of the nicest people I know within football, and I've spoken to. For example, we recorded for 6 hours.
Wow.
I ended up, I put it out as a series of shows. So there was an episode on Fleetwood, an episode in Man City, Newcastle, QPR, and Rangers. So there was 5 shows. He was generous with his time. He was in no rush to leave. And the first thing he said to me was, I know who you are, because I have, before I agree to do an interview with anyone, I do my research and do due diligence. I could see that you were a guy who clearly has passion for football, and I like to give people like yourself my time, and he did. And to be fair to him, he was courteous. And what I liked about Joey, and if you've not listened to the show and you go back and listen to it, he's made some big mistakes in his life. Yeah. He's done some pretty stupid things. Yeah. And you know what I like about him? He admits it. He doesn't hide away from it. He was honest and open to say the big fallout with Mark Hughes at QPR, the way he conducted himself through some of that. He said, looking back now, I'm a bit embarrassed by it, yes, but at the time that's how I felt. In regards to the silly tackle he had on Javi Alonso at Anfield, he explained it by saying, I was going through a really tough time mentally. I was really struggling with off-the-field situations, and I took my frustration out in the park because I wasn't playing in the team. We were in a relegation battle. I wasn't in the favour of the manager at the time, Alan Shearer, and I took my frustration out in the park, and I deserved to be banned. The thing that was interesting about him, being the guy that he is, everyone always talks about the sending off with Aguero. Everyone asks him that. And I spoke to him about it, and I said, look, you've probably had this question 100 times. And he laughed, and he said, I'm going to tell you about it, Callum. He said, my honest opinion, and again, people might look at me and say I'm stupid. When I hit Aguero and obviously it gets sent off, people say, oh, you were very aggressive after it. And he said, yeah, I was. I wanted to take at least 1 or 2 of their players with me. He said, I wanted to try and wind up Vincent Kompany to come and maybe push me and get sent off so that QPR could be playing 10 against 10. Yeah. And he tells a funny story after the game as well. So that day, Man City won the league, QPR stay up. And Samir Nasri came into the QPR dressing room after the game. And him and Jibril Cisse are dancing around, they're celebrating, they're happy. One's won the league, one stayed up in the Premier League. And Joey just remembers saying to Nasri, look, get out of our dressing room. You deserve to win the Premier League. You're a far better player than I will be. But please don't come in and patronise us, because yes, we've stayed up, but we've lost the game today. There's still people in here who don't know if they've got a contract next season. It's not the time to dance around and do that in a restaurant or at a club or at your house afterwards. And he said he just went and sat in the team bus and reflected on things. And one last thing I'd like to say about him, Albert, is I think he'll make a good manager. I think at Fleetwood, he got them to the playoffs. He was heading that way this year. He left the club on mutual terms. He's still got a great relationship with Andy Pilley, the chairman and owner of Fleetwood. So I think he will be a good manager. Joey is someone who, yes, has a fiery character, and he doesn't deny that. But I think he could be a very good coach. I think his next job will be in the Championship in England potentially, and it'll be interesting to see how he develops from there, because for all of his flaws, he is someone who I've got respect for, because he admits in the interview, if he wasn't a footballer, he probably would have went on to be a drug dealer, because that was the neighbourhood he grew up in. He said, so many guys that I went through school with and played football with, they went down the wrong way in life. They get involved in drink, they get involved in drugs, they get involved in gambling. And he said, if it wasn't for football, that would have been my life. So although I've made big mistakes, football is where I always want to be. So in my honest opinion, as I say, a fascinating character, an honest character, someone who's happy to hold their hands up. He won't be everyone's cup of tea, and some people will still listen to me and say, do you know, I still don't like him for what he done here, there and everywhere. I get that and I accept that, but I can only speak on what I witnessed, and for the 6 hours I was with him, he was nothing short of a gentleman.
No, that's great insight. I mean, when you mentioned about Joe Barton, I thought, no, I need to ask Callum how you sort of gauged him and how you found him. But no, unbelievable, fantastic insight. Like I said, he's not everybody's cup of tea, but listen, who is in life, to be honest. But James, same question to you, mate. Yeah, so what got you into the field that you're in, and the writing and interviewing, mate?
Well, for me, it started out doing translation work. I did translation work from Dutch press conferences and post-match and pre-match for an English language football site called Football Oranje. And I would translate the post and pre-match of the managers and players. And I was doing that for a season, and was getting good reports, and always harbored ambitions of writing about football. I mean, I started out when I was a teenager. I used to play on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Mega Drive and play FIFA, and I'd write up match reports about the FIFA game that I played. Or I used to do like mock FA Cup draws and write about it, just in terms of imagination kind of thing. And obviously the ability to speak fluent Dutch and write fluent Dutch has served me brilliantly in the 15 years I've been here. It's my unique selling point. It's one of the greatest gifts that I've given myself in life. But never, ever have I worked so hard in my life. And when I arrived in the Netherlands, you take the course to learn Dutch. It's called Dutch as a Second Language. The first night of the first lesson, there was 20 of us from everywhere: New Zealand, Turkey, Germany, France. When it come to the final exam, there was 4 of us left, and I was the only male. Everybody else had given up. Oh, it's too hard. Oh, it's too difficult. Never give in. Never give in. And I decided that after a year of doing translation work, I approached different clubs about interviewing players or managers. And the first manager to come up was the then manager of FC Den Bosch, William Vloed, who managed ADO Den Haag and also Sparta Rotterdam. And he invited me to the stadium, and it was a 2-hour trip from where I'm based in Amsterdam. And we sat out overlooking the pitch, and we spoke about his playing career and also his management career. And things really spiraled from there. From there on, really, I started to carry on exclusively with Dutch players and managers. And then I did a football podcast for World Football Index about Dutch football. And they asked me if they could publish my interviews going forward. And World Football Index meant that I could spread my wings a little bit. And not only do you have Dutch players and managers, but you also have the likes of Graham Potter, Danny Cowley, Simon Barker. And it really was going great guns. And then, as time rolls on, and, with the likes of Roland Bergkamp, Dennis's nephew, was also a professional footballer, was fantastic. I think for me, when I first realised that this was going places and that the train had left the station, was when I received a phone call from Danny Cowley. I put in a request through the official channels to speak to Danny Cowley. I didn't hear anything. It was a Friday afternoon and my telephone went, and I picked it up and it said, hello, James, Danny Cowley. I was like, hello. He said, James, I've been meaning to get back to you, but I've been really, really busy. He said, I must be honest with you, James. I said, very rarely do I do telephone interviews. He said, but I've read some of your work. I think it's really, really good, and I'll be delighted to help you. And this is a manager who not so long ago brought his team to the Emirates in the FA Cup quarter-final and managed against Arsene Wenger's Arsenal. And I was at that game. And, we spoke about his playing career. We spoke about his management career. And then before you know it, you keep giving everything you've got. And for me, again, the Simon Barker interview, this is the Assistant Chief Executive at a PFA. And he was very complimentary about the way I went about my work. he even said to me that, James, we, in the position we're in at the PFA, we're always very wary of the people that we speak to. He said, the way you go about your business and what you've done, it's a throwback to like a bygone era. And then also with Jamie Carragher as well, to get such a one club man and to get to speak to him about his career at England and also with Liverpool was fantastic. But for me, Albert, it's about the attitude is always the same, whether it's someone who's very well known, whether it's a Dutch player playing in Sweden or in Switzerland or in Denmark. I always say that everyone has a story to tell. You know, people often ask me, and also I know that Callum gets the question quite a lot. You know, what's your favourite interview? And you can't answer it. You can try, but you can't. And I always say that I have watershed interviews, not favourite interviews. Like, for example, obviously Danny Cowley, Bob Wilson, Jamie Carragher, Graham Potter, and going forward as well. And you just have to make sure that you have to be on point. And I'm very fortunate with the unique selling point of being able to interview Dutch players and managers in their mother tongue, because there's very few British people or very few foreign people that can do it. But as I say, when I started out reading children's books in Dutch as a 21-year-old and people looking at me funny when I'm taking the tram into the city centre, I remember one time, and it made me feel 10 feet tall. There's a Dutch children's book about a little rabbit. You know, the rabbit goes to the beach, the rabbit goes to visit her grandmother. And here I am as a 21-year-old sitting in an Amsterdam tram reading this book. And somebody taps me on the shoulder and says to me in Dutch, "Aren't you a little bit old to be reading children's books?" And then I replied to them in their mother tongue, "Excuse me, I'm originally from England. I've only been living here 6 months, and I'm trying to learn your language to the best of my ability." And when I got off the tram and realised that I just said to her everything I wanted to say in her mother tongue, I thought to myself, well, we've made it now. And then you just steamroll from there. It's lovely to hear from Dutch players and managers as well, the compliments. Like some have said to me in the past, "James, if you didn't tell me you were British, I wouldn't know." And that just is a testament to how hard you work. And Callum touched on figures that are important to him. And for me, I don't have figures that I look at, but there are two that stand out for me for two different reasons. First and foremost, Barry Davies. You know, if you're talking about a delivery and letting people know what's going on in football, if you was an alien and you landed on Earth and you didn't know anything about football and you watched Barry Davies commentate on a football game, you would know something by the end of that game in terms of poise and delivery. And I think another one as well, for me, Tim Vickery. I think if you're talking about the best of the best, I mean, this is someone who's lived in Rio de Janeiro for more than a quarter of a century. This is someone who speaks on Brazilian television. He's from England, but his Portuguese is so good. And I can kind of appreciate that as well, because I know how hard it is to learn a foreign language. You know, and lots of British people, they get a bad rep for speaking a foreign language, but we do exist. People like me do exist. I'm not the only one. But you always have to remain modest. You always have to realise that what you're doing. And in the case of the Dutch players I've spoken to as well, the information I've been able to get from them, you know, if they were having interviews in English, they might not have said the things they said. And it's about always making sure that players feel comfortable. It's about doing your due diligence and preparing well. Because I get a lot of people saying to me, "Oh, James, when are you going to go on YouTube? And when are you going to go and start to do videos?" And I say that if I'm speaking to a Dutch player or a Spanish player, that conversation is conducted entirely in their mother tongue. There's no English to be found. I said, if I upload it on YouTube, that means obviously the translation and doing all the subtitles and putting everything in real time can take an awful lot of time. Whereas now, in some of the Dutch interviews that Callum's published on Football CFB, it's been very easy for me to translate from Dutch to English in a written sense. It only takes a couple of hours, not even that. So obviously in terms of making sure that you do everything by the book. But it's been an amazing journey, and I harbour ambitions in the future of hopefully working on the media side of a professional football club. And it's nice on the LinkedIn that lots of clubs are looking, which is great. But I'd much prefer them to say, "James, are you free for a meeting next Wednesday?"
James is coming, mate. Believe me, it is. Trust me, I have every faith, mate. But James, you know what? A great shout about Barry Davies. I mean, listen, I'm old enough to remember who he is and the amount of sports he commentated on, generally speaking. But in terms of football, James, you make a great point. His delivery was exceptional. Anybody go and listen, go on the search engines, go and look at Barry Davies' commentary of the way he delivers, and it's so engaging. I mean, I would say for me personally, in terms of probably current commentators, if I'm looking at it from that point of view, I'm actually quite a big fan of Peter Drury. Actually, I think he's very, very, very I think some commentators they can come across a bit biased, but I think he's very unbiased, and I think his delivery and the way he talks about the game as a commentator is I think for me is exceptional. I have to say that. Callum, do you want to say something there, mate? Sorry.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on Peter Drury. I think he's absolutely fantastic. It makes me sad in a way that, obviously based in the UK, that he's not on one of the major channels like BT or Sky as the main commentator, but he is on the world feed for the Premier League, so he's actually broadcast in more countries than the lead commentators for Sky and BT, because he's all around the world. So he's someone who, as you say, when he's commentating in the Champions League, he's great. And
brilliant. Yeah.
One more I want to throw in, and I know he can get a wee bit of stick at times, and particularly in Scotland, because at England games he's a passionate guy. But I love Clive Chilsley. I think growing up with the Champions League on ITV, I know they get criticism from some, but Clive Chilsley, Andy Townsend, that was your partnership on ITV on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night when Man United went to play Roma or Arsenal went to play Inter Milan. Those were the two that you had, and those voices will always be iconic, because I think we always appreciate and love the football and the voices of our childhood, and those two have to be mentioned. And another one I just want to mention, who I forgot earlier, I know I only got to see him towards the end before he retired from broadcasting, but Des Lynam, he was exceptional. And the best compliment I can pay Gary Lineker is that Des Lynam was such an icon, and he was match of the day. And the biggest compliment I can pay Gary Lineker is, not a lot of people talk about what came before Gary Lineker, and that shows you just how good a job Gary's been able to do. And when you consider, as James mentioned, with Bergkamp and his ambition to maximise football and physiotherapy, if you think of what Gary Lineker's been able to do, maximise his football career to the hilt, played for Barcelona, won Golden Boots at World Cups, and is now probably the most recognised broadcaster in the UK when it comes to football. So he's another that you have to say is inspiring, not only for what he does as a broadcaster, but I would love to have scored even just one of the goals he scored.
You make a good point about Lineker, because I remember him speaking, you guys probably know this, or in the type of work you do, but he openly talked about never ever wanting to ever go into football management. On top of that also as well, I think he mentioned when during the 1990 World Cup, the other England players just look at him like he was crazy, because he would be there like with taking down notes and analysing things, because he sort of wanted to get into sort of what he's doing now. So yeah, he's been exceptional, Gary Lineker, to be fair. Whether you like him or you don't, I can appreciate someone who's actually kind of a student of the game outside of football, playing football, but wanted to go into sort of presenting and broadcasting, which he took a key night in the early 90s when he knew his career was coming to an end. So yeah, fair play to him. But I want to move on to sort of the next subject before I go into it. Guys, respect to you in the chat. Thank you for tuning in. Smash a like if you haven't already, and follow my esteemed guest, like I keep saying. I want to talk about this guy. Let me get an image of him up, because I find him quite fascinating. Julian Nagelsmann. Let me get the banner up. I put up earlier. Where's it gone? Bear with me, guys. Where's it gone? There it is. These are not my words, by the way. The revolutionary coach, training ground innovator. I'll give you a bit of context before I bring you guys in terms of what I want to sort of talk about with Nagelsmann. The only manager I can think of, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, who got a job as a manager or a head coach, whatever way you want to look at it, at that age, is probably Carl Robinson at MK Dons in this country. I can't think of anybody else.
One more, AVB at Porto.
Oh, how old was he?
I think he was 31 when he went in there.
Yeah, because I know Carl Robinson was about 29 when he went to MK Dons. Yep. But yeah, Nagelsmann was, I think, the youngest in Bundesliga history at 28. He actually got the job in, I think, 2016, 2017 at Hoffenheim. But because the manager before him for health reasons, had to leave the job in the season before 2015-2016. He took over. I think they were 7 points. They was in 17th place in the league at the time, Hoffenheim. 7 points away from safety, and they managed to stay up. I find him a fascinating character. I just wanted to tap into you guys' knowledge in terms of do you see him as a revolutionary coach, sort of a trailblazer for maybe why some of the clubs now in maybe domestic football, European football, are going for younger as opposed to experience? How do you see his career progression so far in terms of the 5-6 years he's been a coach? So starting with James, what do you make of Julian Nagelsmann, mate?
Well, first and foremost, I'll let everybody know a little anecdote of when I spoke to the then defender of Hoffenheim, Justin Hochmer. I interviewed him 3 years ago now. Time goes very quick. And he was a defender at Hoffenheim at the time under Julian Nagelsmann. And one of the first questions I posed to him was about your current manager, Julian Nagelsmann. And he said it's unbelievable the concepts that he adopts and the way he changes, and he makes training in particular really fun for the players. And Justin Hochmer 3 years ago was saying, I have no doubt that he will go on to manage a top club. And Justin Hochmer was absolutely right. He's gone on to manage Leipzig. And he's a very calm character, very studious. And I think from my point of view, and I think Callum may well agree, we've spoken to a lot of managers, and managers can't copy somebody else. You have to find your own way. You have to find your own ethos and your way of working. But I think in the case of Julian Nagelsmann, he came in at a good time at Hoffenheim. The expectations wasn't particularly high, and he managed to have the time, because that's what you need at that level. You need the time. People often say about, oh, there is no time in football anymore, but they forget that when a manager is replaced, that you literally rip it up and start again. You've got players who were top dog now fearing for their futures. You've got the youth academy prospects being maybe maligned. It's simply not. This isn't fantasy football we're talking about. This is real life football. And having spoken to a player who played under Nagelsmann at Hoffenheim, he was extremely complimentary about Nagelsmann, especially with tactics and even the training and the training boards and the tactic systems that they use. But all the players, they thought that it was fun to be involved in that. And he's linked with a move to the Premier League. I know that in one of your questions you put to us was, what club do you see? Would you see him coming to? And I can't see him coming in the short term. I think we're in a little bit of a danger at the moment, where, particularly with the Premier League, but we're in danger of it becoming like a little bit of a soap opera, where, in this week's episode, so-and-so was sacked and he was replaced by such and such. If you go into the history of managers, like, for example, Thomas Tuchel managed Dortmund, but he also managed Mainz. And if you think about, the history of managers, where they learn and they gain experience, I'm not entirely sure that the Premier League will be Nagelsmann's next destination. I think there's often been overtures from Spain, for example. I know that Real Madrid were linked. And I think he himself knows that he's very, very young. He's got an awful lot to learn. And people say about, laptop managers in this day and age, but, and the managers like Wenger and Ferguson don't exist anymore. But one thing remains the same, and that is timing is everything in football. Timing of a manager. I mean, I go back to my interview with Craig Brown, former Scottish national team manager, and the great Sir Alex Ferguson at Aberdeen was hell bent on having a good World Cup with Scotland. The initial overtures from Arsenal and Tottenham, he said I'm not willing to speak to any of you until after the World Cup, because I want to have a good World Cup. Arsenal appointed George Graham. I think Spurs appointed David Pleat, and then the great Alex Ferguson even had a period where he thought, "Oh my God, where am I going to go?" And it was Martin Edwards that said to Graham Strachan, he said, "What about that manager at Aberdeen?" And Strachan replied the following: "If you want a quiet and peaceful life, stay away from him. If you want success in your football club, and you want someone to put a stick of dynamite in your football club, he will give you success." And therein goes one of the greatest management stories we will ever see. But I think in the case of Nagelsmann, I see a lot of people expecting the Premier League to be his next move. I'm not so sure. I think he's a little bit too studious for that. It's very naive of some players and managers It doesn't happen as much with managers, but it does happen with players. Some players seem to think that you can plan a career. You can't plan a career. You can have ambitions and how you want it to go, but you cannot plan a career. And I think for people to automatically expect that Nagelsmann, because obviously the German flavour is in, that he will be the next one, I'm not so sure. I think he may well end up in Spain, I think, before the Premier League. But that's just my personal opinion.
There you go. Sorry, let me take my mute off. That might help. But James, you make a good point about Nagelsmann, because you talked about the word timing, and he actually has said that when he's been courted by Madrid. You know, sometimes, yes, it's fantastic to get linked with major jobs, but sometimes timing is of the essence. And you know, he's I forgot how young he still is. He's only 33, and he's been managing for so long. So it's I know he speaks. You know, he kind of has a lot of respect for Guardiola, but he speaks very highly of Thomas Tuchel, who sort of, you know, I think under Tuchel, he gave him a bit of responsibility in terms of, because Nagelsmann's obviously his playing career got kind of hampered in terms of injury, so he gave him a bit more responsibility in terms of, you know, looking at opponents and scouting them and looking at strengths and weaknesses. So this guy, like you said, I'm not too 100% sure if he will come to the Premier League anytime soon. Personally, I think it's just a fashionable thing to turn around and say that he will. I don't necessarily think that would be the next progression for him. But Callum, to bring you in, what do you make of Nagelsmann, as, like you said, the revolutionary coach, training ground innovator?
I think what fascinates me with Nagelsmann is what also fascinates me by a coach like Brendan Rodgers. Both of them had their playing careers curtailed at a young age due to injury, and they're students of the game, and as a result they have put every ounce of their being and their energy into coaching, and from a young age they've been able to work their way up into some really good jobs, and rightly so. I think whenever you speak or hear people that have played under him speak, they always talk about his intensity. They always talk about how he likes his team to play in the front foot, and you could see that with Timo Werner when he worked with him.
Yeah.
Timo Werner was very direct. He was scoring lots of goals. And Thomas Tuchel hinted at it recently when he spoke about Werner. He was on Monday Night Football here in the UK last week, and he was asked about Timo Werner's best position. And he said, if you watched him under Julian Nagelsmann, he played on the left as a sort of inside forward, not directly through the middle, but a sort of inside forward from the left who could exploit the space that was left by holding midfielders when they pushed higher up the pitch. And I think that's something that's key and shows the respect that he has in regards to coaching, when someone like Thomas Tuchel, who he looks up to, also compliments him for his work. He's naturally empathetic because of the way his career ended and the fact that he's been coaching from a young age, something, again, that I would compare to Brendan Rodgers in that regard. My only worry with him in domestic German football is the glass ceiling. And I say that because since Jurgen Klopp left Borussia Dortmund, Bayern Munich have been really, really strong, and they've been able to hammer home that financial advantage that they have. You look at Dortmund, who this summer will change coach, and in terms of a coach up and coming, Marco Rose has to be mentioned. He's going to Dortmund this summer, and it'll be interesting to see what he can do there. But if you think of the likes of Sancho, you think of the likes of Holland, you think of the likes of Delaney and other players that Dortmund have got, they still can't seem to close that gap to Bayern. You look at Leipzig under Nagelsmann, yes, he's got them progressing further than they ever have in Europe, which is great. And I think, in a strange way, I think Europe, obviously it won't be this season, but I think Europe will be the competition that he will make the most impact on, because in Germany at this moment, I think you're in a boxing match with one hand behind your back, because Bayern can go out and sign tailor-made Leroy Sané in the summer. Boom, go and get him. They can also sign Upamecano this summer from Leipzig and Nagelsmann pretty easily, which is always going to be tough. Whereas you don't see that as much in the Premier League. You don't see, you couldn't For example, you couldn't see Man City going to Liverpool and say, right, we'll buy Van Dijk, and he comes. You wouldn't necessarily expect to see that or see it often. So that's a unique challenge I think he's got. I think the only con, obviously I've talked about lots of pros, the only con you could say, and again, I've linked him with Brendan Rodgers a few times, could be the fact that could he be called maybe at times too open? You think Manchester United scored 5 by them this year? I know they won the return game. They conceded 5 to a Manchester United team that at that time of the season were under a lot of pressure. Against Liverpool, I know Liverpool can do that to most teams, conceded quite a few goals. So there could be a slight argument that these teams are too open. It wouldn't be a big criticism of me because I love attacking football and I love seeing teams playing the front foot. And I think with him, as he gets to work with better players, those deficiencies that maybe his teams can have at set times in games when they come up against top opposition could come out. In regards to the Premier League, I think one of the North London clubs, Spurs and Arsenal, would be the sort of clubs that I would see him making a big impact with. I think Abramovich at Chelsea's got too much of an itchy trigger finger.
Yeah.
When you see Lampard going after 18 months, is Nagelsmann the sort of coach that would go into somewhere like that in 18 months' time? All the effort he'd planned to put in is gone. I don't think so. Could I see him at a Manchester United? Probably not. Just because I don't think he's the sort of manager United would go for. And that's not a slight on Nagelsmann. That's just the way United are run. I don't really think he would be someone they would naturally go to if they changed manager. And in regards to Man City, could be an option, but again, I don't know. Part of me thinks they'll have something up their sleeve already. So I think, as I say, a Spurs and an Arsenal, if he was to come to the Premier League, could be clubs he could come in, similar to his Leipzig side, where they're sitting normally 4th or 5th or 3rd, and he's in there to try and bridge the gap. That being said, I completely echo James's view. Don't see him coming to the Premier League anytime soon. I wouldn't be in a massive hurry to come to the Premier League either if I was him, as I've mentioned, because there are owners with itchy trigger fingers, as I've said, who, when you lose 5 games in the trot, boom, you're out the door, and in comes Goose Hiddink on caretaker charge again, or whoever it may be. I mean, it's a crazy situation. One coach I want to mention, I know in one of your questions, Al, but you said a domestic coach who's maybe not the most well-known and is up and coming. I want to mention Florian Kohfeldt, who is at Werder Bremen. Okay. I've got a good friendship with Derek Ray, who covers German football week in, week out. And Derek speaks incredibly highly of Florian, as does Kevin Hatchard, another guy who I know well, who covers the Bundesliga. And when you look at where Werder Bremen were last season, they were struggling towards the foot of the table. He kept them up when a lot of people thought they were gone, dead and buried in football in terms. He kept them up, and he's got them playing some really good stuff. They're sitting in 11th place at the moment. They're having a strong season considering where they were and given their budget. So he's a manager who I wouldn't be surprised if he was to become the next manager of a team like Mönchengladbach, as a natural progression on his way up. As I say, Marco Rose has made the move to Dortmund, or is making the move rather, this summer. Another coach who's talked about an awful lot is Jesse March at RB Salzburg, and I think Jesse March is a good coach. I think he's up and coming, but I think it will be a big jump whenever he leaves Salzburg to maybe go to the Bundesliga or the Eredivisie or to Spain. So I'm just tempering my expectations of him for now. But Kohfeldt, I think, is a manager who will get a step up in terms of budget with a club in the next couple of years. You look at his career, he's 38, like Nagelsmann, didn't have a long playing career, went into coaching at a young age, coached the second team, then steps up to the first team when he's ready, like Pep Guardiola did. I'm not comparing him to Pep, but just emphasising they have a slightly similar journey in that regard. So he's one of the coaches coming up, having spoken to guys that watch the Bundesliga week in, week out and do it for a living. They say he's the coach that they're looking at this moment and thinking, your time will come, and I think you'll do a good job. So it'll definitely be interesting to see when he gets that opportunity. And as I've said as well, Marco Rose, what a manager he looks as if he could be, and he's got a big job on at Dortmund next season, but I back him to be success.
No, great insight, guys. Before I was asking one last question on Nagelsmann, but you've probably seen this quote. I saw this in Bundesliga.com. I think it was a year ago about Nagelsmann. He was interviewed, I believe, but just got it up on the screen. He took up he took up a conscious decision to take up horse training because he wanted to develop as a person. So he said, "How do I control the effect I have on other people? When I walk into a room and people don't know me, the first impressions are he's arrogant. I think I'm assertive. People's perceptions change when they know me. People judge you on a profession before anything else. I'm not perceived in the same way as a friend of mine who might be an engineer. This is something you can train with horses only. Train with horses very well. They do not judge, but only look. Is he brash? Is he threatening me? With the horses, they react very differently. I've worked with 6 or 7 of them doing exercises using gestures and facial expressions to scare them away or encourage them. It's not easy, and it's not something everyone can do." But the last one I want to ask you two guys is about Nagelsmann. Is I think he's mentioned the fact that because of his age and he's still quite young, he's quite good in terms of knowing the players' trigger points. Is that something you would agree with, or do you think that could be a little bit detrimental towards his progression as a as a head coach? With James, I'll point that to you, mate.
Well, I think that he's progressing as a very young manager. And I think a lot of people who are fans of football, I think they really underestimate how much a difficult job it actually is. You're dealing with human beings where if you are a striker or a midfielder, let's take a striker, for example. If you're a striker, you're only concerned with your goal ratio. How many goals do you score? How are you putting yourself about? Whereas if you are a manager, you have to think about the entire team. You have to think about the welfare of the players as individuals and also as a collective. So you've got to think, how can my individuals, how can they continue to improve? How can they continue to improve as individuals? How can my team continue to improve as a collective? And I think it's a danger with British media as well, where they're always looking to be hot on the next best thing, and then as soon as that fades out, they're on to the next one. But sometimes you just have to wait and see. It's important to remember the journeys of some of the greatest managers. I touched on Sir Alex Ferguson. Arsene Wenger was relegated, but people don't talk about that. He was relegated with Nancy. He had a very difficult time at Monaco when Marseille were really in their pomp. And you see about Sir Bobby Robson. was also sacked in the very, very early days. And he speaks very highly in his book about literally being saved from the dole queue by Ipswich. And that's why he stayed there for so long. And, it's important to always think to watch a managerial progression, because Callum makes some great points about up and coming managers. And obviously, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it around a bit. So obviously, I'm based in the Netherlands, so I thought I'll give 2 in particular. I said Alkmaar had a tremendous season last year under Arne Slot, who was the former assistant to John van der Brom, and very highly rated. He will be the new Feyenoord manager as of next season. He was relieved of his duties by Arsed because when he received interest from Feyenoord, he didn't tell Arsed about it, and they decided to dispense of his services. So he's now on like a certain amount of time where he's waiting to get started at Feyenoord. Feyenoord are managed by Dick Advocaat in his last season, and he wanted to win the cup with them, but they were knocked out by Heerenveen midweek. So Arne Slot is a manager to look out for in the Dutch league. In terms of Dutch managers, we touched on the Bundesliga, Peter Bos, such an underrated manager. And one of the things that people forget about Peter Bos, people like to talk about his ill-fated stint at Dortmund, but I'm going to turn it around a little bit. Heracles Almelo, who have become an established Eredivisie side for the last 15 years, he was the one that got them up and kept them up. He's also filled different roles such as technical director and sporting director. So he's not just a manager. He's filled lots of different roles. Also played for Feyenoord in his own career. And when he was Ajax manager, bringing them to a Europa League final as well, which nobody expected, and being very, very close as well with the Champions League in terms of what the squad that he had coming in. And for those that don't know, because a lot of people like to think that Matthijs de Ligt fell out of the sky, but I'll give viewers a little story. Peter Bos was manager of Ajax, and he's training one day, and his telephone goes, and it's Mark Overmars in the office. And Mark Overmars says to Beta Boss, I've got a 16-year-old that I'd really like you to take a look at, and I want you to bring him into the first team setup. And Peter Boss thought, he's 16 years old, that can't be right. But send him through anyway. But little did he realise it was Matthijs de Ligt, who, having watched him since he broke through and used to translate his press conferences where I would translate what he said as a 19-year-old. And as I'm translating it, I'm thinking, did a 19-year-old really say that? In terms of being mature and wise among his years, beyond his years in most cases. And I think two managers that I think very much you need to watch out for. I think Arne Slot, particularly next season, but he was also part of the reason as to why I said ran Ajax so close last season before the Eredivisie was curtailed. And I think lots of people are sleeping on Peter Bosz. I wouldn't be surprised if the well-known list that Southampton have of managers for the future, I wouldn't be surprised if he's on it.
Callum kind of answered the question anyway, so no, in terms of bringing on to two to look out for. But no, this is, like I said, that's why I'm glad to get you two guys on. Look, I don't know everything about football, so you know I like to educate myself outside of just watching football of Arsenal, which I don't think enough people do at what outside of their own club, which I think it's a good thing to do, to be aware of up and coming players and managers that we're not accustomed to. But yeah, I also wanted to ask you, where am I at now? So yes, I want to get you guys' opinions on, let me get it up now. Yeah, start kicking off with Callum. How has the impact of COVID-19 impacted the way you work in terms of positives and negatives?
In terms of positives, I would say it's shown me how to use Zoom. It's shown me how to use things like StreamYard. It's shown me how to utilize Skype, and those are platforms that obviously I was aware of. But when we were able to in that normal world, it seems like a fairy tale now, sadly, where we could go to the pub, where we could go and play pool and snooker, where we could go and play five-a-sides, when we could go and watch our sides. I mean, in that type of world, normally I would try and do interviews face-to-face, which was great because when you're in the same room as the person, you can read their body language and you can strike up a trust quite quickly. So I would say positives would be the learning how to use online platforms more, because it's something that I probably wouldn't have learned in the depth that I have had it not been for this situation. Although that's been a positive, I'm also going to say it's a negative, which might sound daft, but the reason I say that is because I miss human contact. I know that makes me sound tragic, as if I've got no friends and nobody likes me.
It doesn't. We're all feeling it, mate. Don't worry about that. You're not the only one. Trust me.
But I just miss the thought of, just as I say, for example, if I was in London and there was an Arsenal game on and you and James were there, how great would it be to be able to come up and speak face-to-face, shake hands, talk about who's going to be in the starting 11, who's not, what do you make Arteta? Callum, you watched Tierney at Celtic, do you rate him? Ask, James Odegaard, what do you think? He spent time in the Netherlands. That's the sort of chats that you love having face-to-face, and 100%. The debates, and I think that's something that we're all missing. So for me, I would say positives, it's taught me online communications. Negatives, it's taken away those face-to-face interactions. But overall, I have to be honest with you, and I think James would say the same. It's been a really negative time for so many people, and it's been so sad with the lives that have been lost. And of course, nothing will ever replace those. If we analyse it from a purely football and our work point of view, and I know it's hard to ignore, I don't mean to ignore anyone, but if we analyse it from strictly that point of view, I would say for me it's been as good as it can be. And I think James might say the same, where we're still having interviews, we're still having content. Of course it will never replace, as James said, speaking to someone, looking at the view of the pitch and having that cup of coffee and the chat and the connection. But the fact that we're still able to do what we love when this is a tough time for everyone means that it's been as good as it can be. That's the way I would word it, because we don't want to be in this situation. As soon as it's safe to be out of it, of course we would love to get out of it, but given how how absolutely centre of attention with the Bates. I agree with you, Gunnar. So I totally agree, and I think that's what we all miss. So it's been as good as it can be, but as I say, I think we all still crave that normality and the chance to catch up with friends and colleagues and so many others.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. James, you want to add anything to that, mate, at all in that aspect how you work, mate?
Well, echo I echo Callum's thoughts, really. Obviously, the positives have been that players and managers have had more time where you got the interviews that you might not necessarily get because the player has more time. But as Callum says as well, with how spontaneous it can be, and looking forward to going to games and planning games in and seeing friends, and the audio and visual contact that we've made. You'd be speaking to these people in person. But I think on the flip side of that, neither Callum's work or neither my work or working together as a collective, it's not behind a paywall. It's free for you to read and free for you to listen to. So for the people that are having maybe a difficult day and they get excited about reading about a player who they used to love, they don't have to pay for it. It's just enjoy it. It's there for you. So it's nice to be able to give something back as well, because obviously we're in a privileged position, but obviously it's been a huge journey. But you realise as well that football it's a world game. I mean, I've been really fortunate, especially on the women's side. 5 of that Dutch national team that started a World Cup final against the United States, I've spoken to 5 of them firsthand. And then the likes of Chloe Lacasse playing for the Benfica women, and Benfica being a massive club, and speaking to African players as well, the likes of Stanley Amusi, who won the African Cup of Nations, and Arnold Origi about Kenya. And you realise it's a world game, because I'm starting to get the impression that the football is becoming very European-centric. But the game does exist in South America. The game does also exist in Africa, and there's many stories to be told. So it's nice to give a perspective and shine a light on things that don't often get talked about.
No, I appreciate it. No, it's well said to both of you on that aspect. It's been it's almost been a year. It'll be a year next month, wouldn't it? Since this whole outbreak started, and people's ways of living, and it's been sad times, but we got to stick together. And as negative as social media can be, and I've spoken about it, on my platform, social media's brought me together with you, James, and Callum, and the other Arsenal content creators out there. Yes, we can debate and have misgivings about the way our clubs are being run, but it has brought us together and sort of get that community together and keep us a little bit sane, to be honest with you. Guys, I'm going to give the guys in the chat a bit of a warning. I'm going to wrap up soon, but in the next 5 minutes, if you any questions for James and Callum, get them in, man. I'm sure these guys will give you some expert knowledge and answers, man, honestly. But yeah, the next one I want to ask you guys is, see if I can find it on my screen. Kicking off with Callum. What one piece of advice would you both give to anyone who wants to pursue a career in broadcasting, writing and interviewing?
I would say work as hard as you possibly can. And James and I have this conversation quite a lot off air. Treat every interview with the exact same importance and see your next interview as the most important, regardless of whether you're speaking to a World Cup winner or a non-league footballer or a footballer in the Netherlands or a footballer in South America or from Bristol or from Glasgow. Treat everyone with the same respect. And one thing I want to emphasise here, Albert, and what I love about yourself, Albert, and James and so many others is you guys don't do this, what I'm about to say. There's so many people out there, unfortunately, at this moment who think you can take shortcuts, who think you can send a message to someone and say, can I have the phone number of Robert Pires? Even if I had his number, I couldn't possibly give you Robert's number because that's Robert's number, not my number. And I can give you my number if you want to speak to me. Highly doubt you do, but I can't. As I say, that's the one thing that I would say to people is work hard, treat every interview as the most important one of your life, do the same amount of prep, because if you don't prep the same as I did for Henrik Larsson, as I did with Kerr Waddle, who's a lower league player in Scotland, people will see it quickly. People will notice that you were interested in one guy or one woman and not in the other. So 100%. Do the same level of prep. And as I say, as James I'm sure will go on to, there literally are no shortcuts. James started 5 years ago going to places that people in the Netherlands didn't go to. I started just over 12 months ago sending a message to Christian Nade with 0 track record, having never met Christian, asking for some help, and he was kind enough to give me that help.
Yeah.
You know, so at the end of the day, you have to be proactive. You have to work hard. Don't be a pest towards people if they don't give you your time. And the reason I say that is there's been people that I have approached for interviews who've said, unfortunately, at the moment, I'm just so busy with coaching, or I'm so busy with this, I cannot give you half an hour at this moment. However, we can revisit it in 6 months or a year. And again, you see that as a positive. You thank them for their time and the chat that they've had with you, even via message or email, and you move on in a polite way, because something that, again, and I don't want to come across, even at the age of 25, as a grumpy old man, but we've talked about earlier about certain Arsenal fans and Manchester United fans with certain players and being obsessed with the cult of personality. At times, there is a bit of an attitude, I feel, with certain people, like they're owed something by a former player or a former manager or from a fellow writer. Well, you've spoken to X, Y, and Z. Why can't you just pass his details on? Or this guy that I used to love watching who played for Hibs isn't free to give me an interview. Oh, he's very arrogant. How dare he? That's not the case. People are busy. You have to understand that. Even during lockdown, not everyone can spare half an hour because they have kids, they're homeschooling. They might even still be working, because not all footballers stay in football when they retire. And as I say, in terms of the shortcut element, this is advice that I would give to anyone. Please, and it's not me being arrogant, it's not James being arrogant, it's not you being arrogant, Albert. If you go to someone and you say, how did you get that interview? Can I have his contact? It comes across as disrespectful, because nothing's given to you for free, and I'm sure 100%. James will echo this. You're not given access to Kevin Campbell or Henrik Larsson for free. They do their research on you before they agree to speak to you.
100%.
Kevin read James's work. Henrik looked at my work and said, do you know, I like what you're doing, as James said with the Danny Cowley story. I'm willing to speak to you. And I think that's something that I would emphasise to people. Start with who you know or people that you can have access to. So, for example, the best advice I would give someone, it's the advice Alan Keegan, who is the Manchester United announcer. He was a lecturer at a university in the north of England, says to his students, make the most of what you have. Don't think about what you don't. If you live in Staffordshire, go to Stafford Rangers. If you live in Newcastle, don't go to Newcastle and ask if you can speak to Saint Maximum at this stage of your career. Go to Gateshead and go and volunteer 100%. And maybe speak to a player after a game. Because see, when you start building up the trust and you start working with what you've got, that time, that hard work, that effort, it will grow for you. At the end of the day, it would be very easy for myself or James or you, Albert, to say, I didn't get to speak to him and her because they're too busy. I'm just going to give up now. No, you do what you can. You go and speak to the people that you can have access to. And I always say to people, you have so much access on your doorstep. If you live in the UK or even the Netherlands, where James does, there are lower league clubs who will be desperate for the publicity, because not a lot of journalists in the national press can cover them. Because if you're being paid £800,000 a year by The Guardian or The Independent as their chief football writer, with all due respect, maybe those guys don't have the enough hours in the day to drive to Northampton and speak to the captain. Maybe they don't, because they're covering United, they're covering Chelsea, they're reporting live from a Champions League final. But if you're starting out, make the most of those contacts. Make the most of those clubs that don't get the coverage. Nobody's not covering these clubs because they have an agenda against them. It's just because there's so much content out there. And as I say, my advice to anyone would be, work hard, make the most of what you've got. James and I and yourself, Albert, aren't multimillionaires who can say, right, I'm going to offer this former United captain £5,000 to speak to me. We don't have those finances, but what we do have is hard work, determination, professionalism, and we do our due diligence, and that's something that can take anyone far. James and I and yourself haven't been handed anything on a plate. We've worked for it, but as some of the great football managers have said in years gone by, Jockstein, I believe, said this: you create your own luck. Yes, you can get a wee start somewhere, but if you work hard, it'll be repaid, and create your own luck, son, as they say.
Callum, brilliant. Before I ask James your thoughts, mate, yeah, you make a good point, because even when I started this sort of YouTube thing, I said I've been fortunate enough, and people say to me, how did you get that big YouTuber on your channel? I said, yeah, I've met people before at games, but that doesn't necessarily give me the right for them to come and do me a favor. They don't owe me that. I just happen to have met them outside the Emirates, for example. But I said, look, if you're gonna, I'm grateful if they come on and give me their time, or half an hour or an hour. Do your vetting, check out my content. If I'm not for you, then you'll make your own mind up in terms of whether you want to collaborate or to do things with me. I don't have an issue with that, because I think you should take the responsibility when it's your platform to do the necessary due diligence of who you bring onto your platform. I think that's very important for content creators. I've learned that very quickly, sort of doing that. But yeah, James, what's your thoughts on what Callum was saying, or is there anything you want to add to it?
Well, I think Callum makes some great points. It's always about keeping your integrity. Another fantastic phrase from the great Jockstein: always keep your integrity. Realise that it's a world game and you're dealing with people at all levels of world football, and you have a duty to make sure you get it right. I would encourage people to do their due diligence. If there's anybody watching looking for a road in, or how they can get started, for me, my linguistic skills was my opening of the door, the ability to interview Dutch players and managers in their mother tongue. So if there's anybody watching today based in Britain or based anywhere in the world who have a good level of a language that they speak, that could be your starting point. I'm not saying that you're going to grow and have lots and lots of interviews, but it could be your starting point, because an awful lot can get lost in translation. I had it a couple of weeks ago on regarding William Saliba, where on the Arsenal Twitter they were saying about the quotes upon what he said, and some of the Arsenal fans were trying to say, oh, he said this, he said that, and I pulled a couple up and I said, have you ever interviewed in a foreign language? They said, no. I said, who wrote the interview? Whose name is on it? They said, oh, a network. I said, that's not what I asked. What I asked is whose name is on it, because you have to take pride in your work as well. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Football is also a very small world. I'll give you an example. Callum released my interview with Naomi Hilhorst, who is an up-and-coming player in the Netherlands. Due to my contacts at the player agency, I was offered the opportunity to speak to Naomi. Obviously, I have good contacts, but it's, again, the local languages is coming back to help me an awful lot. But it's about the way you conduct yourself, because players act with one another, players speak with one another, and you mustn't be afraid to ask questions that you think are a little bit different. I'll give you an example. I interviewed Rowe Fox, and we spoke about Norwich City, and we spoke about Newcastle. And we also spoke about playing international football for Montserrat. And his response when I asked him that question was the following. He said, wow. He said, James, I tell you what, when I woke up this morning, never in a million years did I think you'd ask me that question. I said, well, you've got a lot of people trying to get into such a small space. So you've got to stand out in your best way, and never forget that you are putting something out into the world. You can't go and pick it back up and put it in your pocket. Once it's out there, it's out there. So you've got to make sure that it's completely on the money. At the risk of sounding obviously not arrogant, but I've seen interviews from other people down the years where it's been so skimmed because they want to say that their interview was also published, but you can tell that it's been rushed. And when you rush your work, people can tell. And it's about making sure that you keep your integrity at all times. And also, a final piece of advice, don't forget to enjoy it. You're not doing it for your followers. You're not doing it for the likes and the retweets. You're doing it because you want to do it. And that's the most important thing.
Can I just come in there, Albert? Sorry on that.
Go on, mate.
To echo what James has said, one of the things I've been asked recently by a few people is, your podcast's doing really well. It's listened to by a lot of people. Why don't you set up a Patreon site and get people to pay for it? And I always say the same thing that James has said there. People are generous with their time with me. I am not someone who's going to cash in on their generosity. If I've been given an hour of let me think, Matt Letizier's time, and he's given me an hour of his time for free, which he has. Who am I to charge £5 per month or £1 per week for someone to listen to that? As James has said, we do this because we love football. Yes, one day James wants to work for a professional club. I would love to work for Manchester United one day. I would. I would love to in the media side. I would love to. It's a dream. It'll probably never happen, but I would love to do that. And even if it never happens, James and I and yourself, Albert, will be able to look back on what we've done, the people we've spoken to, the laughs and the questions and the moments we've had, and say, I gave that everything and I really enjoyed it. And as James said, enjoyment is key. Too many people get into podcasts and YouTube and writing because they think, within 3 episodes, I'll have 100,000 followers and I'll have a sponsorship deal with Adidas 100%. And just like Joe Rogan. I don't listen to Joe Rogan, but I just know he's got an exclusive deal with Spotify. Spotify will sign me up and they'll pay me a 50 million. It doesn't work like that. As James has said, James has got 300 written interviews. I've got just touching 300 broadcast interviews, and James and I aren't the finished article yet. James and I have still got so much that we want to achieve. We've got so many more stories that we want to share in the men's game and the female game across the globe. And at the end of the day, that passion and that enjoyment never burns out, because if it did, James wouldn't be at 300 interviews. I wouldn't be as well. We would have given up a long time ago if it was for followers and fame and money. We do it because we love it. And as you've said, James, he put it in the perfect sentence earlier. This is a tough time for everyone. I'm struggling at times. You're struggling at times. James is struggling at times because we miss our friends. We miss our family members. We miss watching the Arsenal, watching United live. We'll get those days back, but while we're going through this tough time, why not share some positive work for free? Why not share your insight and the insight of footballers with people who enjoy reading it or enjoy listening to it? Because at the end of the day, in a time where everyone's struggling and having ups and downs, if you can give them even 5 minutes of their day that they enjoy listening to or enjoy reading, it makes it all worth it.
Yeah, well said.
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah. I was going to say, the two things you got, the key things you guys have mentioned. I mean, I echo a lot of what you guys said in terms of chasing the subscribers and, you know, making your content credible or your craft, you know, harnessing your acquired skills that you've already done throughout the hard yards of making it where you are to now. But, you know, chase the ambition and hopefully the success will come with it. Because if the success is your immediate goal, I'm sorry, but it's just not going to happen. One more thing, guys in the chat, if you want to get your questions, get them in quick, because I'm going to ask these guys one more thing, and I'm going to ask you about Mikel Arteta. I'm going to start with Callum first, because obviously you can answer this from an outside perspective, being a United fan. What do you make of Mikel Arteta in terms of what you saw last season and what you've seen this season?
I think Mikel Arteta last season, he obviously won a trophy, which was a positive. That was something that every club in the country, whether you are Arsenal or Accrington, you want to win a trophy. So that was a positive. Returning Arsenal to the Champions League is something that's going to be very important. Of course it is. That's something that he has to do, and he'll know that. I think he's a progressive young manager, a coach. He's someone who I think will have a good career in management. But you've also got to remember his age and his inexperience. I'm not saying that means you say, right, give him 15 years or 20 years that they gave Arsene Wenger, and I'm sure he'll deliver in that time. You have to be pragmatic, and you also have to analyse honestly. It's the same with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Ole should be... Thanks, Shane. I'll need to check it out. I've not checked it yet. In terms of Solskjaer, he's in his third season now.
Yeah.
If he doesn't win a trophy this season and finishes top 4, he'll get next season. But if he doesn't win a trophy, I think he'll move on, because if you've got 4 years at a football club like Manchester United, and you've achieved relative success with top 4 finishes, decent runs in the cup, if you don't have a trophy at the end, it's normal for a club to say mutually, thank you very much for your service, we're going to go in a different direction. And that's something that will be interesting to see if Arsenal do that eventually with Mikel. I think he deserves time. As I say, I'm not saying time as like 6-7 years. I think he definitely deserves another 18 months because Arsenal are at the moment, they are where they are at the moment. He'll need another transfer window this summer so that he can then say, this is my team. And when Mikel Arteta can look you in the eye, Albert, and you in the eye, James, and every Arsenal fan across the UK and the world and say, this is my team, judge me now, which I think he will be able to do in the summer because he'll have been in the job for a period of time, that's when he'll be judged. Solskjaer is judged now at Manchester United for his team. He signed Wan-Bissaka, he signed Maguire, he signed Fernandes, Cavani and others. He signed those players, so he's been judged on who he's bought and who he's sold. And that'll begin in earnest for Mikel this summer. And I think next season will be massive for him and for Arsenal. Can he take Arsenal where Unai Emery was deemed to have failed? I'm not 100% sure. Emery was one match away from taking Arsenal back to the Champions League. I know people will be listening and screaming at me saying, but he didn't take us there, Callum. You don't know. He didn't. But he was close to doing so. Can Mikel get Arsenal over that line where Unai Emery had Arsenal? That's going to be the big test. I'm not silly enough to patronise Arsenal fans and say you should be a top 4 club and be happy. Arsenal Football Club, like Manchester United, should be competing to win the league title. 100%, they should be. 100%. However, it will take time. And as the comment that just came in there said, let him build his team. Let him take Arsenal in a positive direction.
And by the way, Callum, by the way, Richard's a Man United fan as well.
There you go.
He is. Yeah. He's a Man United fan.
And if Mikel might take Arsenal to third, and after the end of next season, you might say to yourself, do you know, thanks for taking us to third, but we're going to go in a different direction to maybe get us over that line and win that title. And I think that's the way football should be. Don't sack someone after 8 games. Give them a body of work and a time to implement their ideas. And then after, I always say 2 or 3 seasons. The reason that 2 wouldn't be my ideal, but the way modern football's went, 2 is probably what you'll get. But ideally, 3 years into a job, you need to look at your manager, if you're a board of directors, and say, is he taking us in the right direction? Yes or no? And then answer the second question, can he take us even further? Because there will be some managers that can take a team into the top 4. Look at Pochettino, took Spurs into that top 4.
Yeah.
Could he win a trophy? No. Did he win a trophy? No. He was still a successful manager, but they went and changed tact and brought Mourinho in because they believe he can win the trophy that Pochettino couldn't. That might ultimately fail for Daniel Levy in Tottenham, and I'm sure all the listeners to this channel will be willing it on and understand that. That's the way United fans are with City and Liverpool. Of course it is. But that's what I mean. I think you give someone a body of work and then you sit down after 3 years or 2 or 3 years and say, are we going in the right direction? Yes or no? Can you take us to the next level? Yes or no? And if you can't answer those questions with emphatic yeses, you probably make a change then. But what frustrates me with football is, you see it with Solskjaer all the time. Man United lose 2 games, sack him, bring in Allegri, bring in Zidane. Somebody phone Gary Pallister and ask if he wants a job. There's always an obsession with somebody new. God bless Gary, what a player he was. But there's always an obsession with the next signing or the next manager or the next team selection. Sometimes you've got to be pragmatic and say it's a building process and evaluate it after a realistic period of time. Because if we're being brutally honest, Albert and James, did you expect Arteta to come in and take Arsenal from where they were to league title within a year or 2? I don't think so. You'd probably expect a bit more from him so far, absolutely. But if he can get Arsenal back to the Champions League in the next 18 months, you might look at it and say, he's done a good job. Can he take us on to the next direction? We'll wait and see. But I think that's when you analyse it.
No, thanks for that, Callum. You know what it is? I like to, as much as I like to talk amongst other Arsenal fans, for me, I like to hear the perspective of other football fans that are not associated with Arsenal, because sometimes it's a different perspective, sometimes it's a different take. So no, Callum, thanks for executing that perfectly. James, I'm going to ask you the same question, but I'm also going to add to it. What did you make of the links with Arteta before Emery? Because we obviously thought he was going to get the job instead of Emery.
Well, first and foremost, Arsenal found themselves in a position where we had a manager for 22 years. It was like one of the last managers to hold such a position. And obviously, Gazidis not being as proactive as he could have been at board level. This is someone who was trying to impress Robin van Persie with pie charts and statistics in order to get him to stay. And Van Persie's reaction was, I'm not interested in pie charts and statistics. I want to win the Premier League. And did you know that Van Persie didn't force a move to Manchester United? Van Persie warned Gazidis and Wenger, if you don't sell me to Juventus, then the chance is quite big that I'll be joining a domestic rival. And then what happens? Gazidis doesn't get on with the Juventus counterpart, doesn't pick up his telephone and goes on holiday in the middle of a transfer window. And Van Persie ends up at United. So Arsenal at board level were on the wane a little bit, where the people didn't have the best welfare of the club at heart. And at the moment, for me, the biggest problem is our owner. We have an owner who doesn't have Arsenal's best interests at heart. Stan Kroenke sees Arsenal as a healthy investment. That's it. Does he care if we win or we lose? He just sees Arsenal as a healthy investment, and that's it. And I don't think he's proactive enough. So yes, you can try to make changes at board level and changes at management level, but if you have an owner in charge who's only looking at the sheets in terms of the bank balance and the money involved, then we're not going to go anywhere. We are there are only two clubs in English football bigger than what we are, and that's Manchester United and that's Liverpool. We've won 13 league titles, we've won 14 FA Cups, and we've also won European trophies. We found ourselves in a position with Arsene Wenger where he's controlling our money as if it's his money, and it was as if it's against his philosophy to do that. But I'm not being funny. If that's the way you are, then you need to resign, because football moves on. In the case of Unai Emery, shortly after he was relieved of his duties, I interviewed his former Real Sociedad teammate and also fellow manager Imanol Idiakis. They're also friends together. And he was saying about Unai Emery, even the work he did at Valencia when they were broke, they had no money, and he got them into the Champions League. People talk about Arsenal being one result away from the Champions League. We had a very poor December, and that's what led to not qualifying for the Champions League. Not the penalty miss against Tottenham, not the away day against West Ham, starting from the Southampton away game in the mid-December. But people also forget as well that we reached our first European final for 13 years. And we lost, unfortunately, but people are, Emery's useless. He's obviously not useless. He's won the European Cup, Europa League 3 times in a row. And I think some fans who have clout, in inverted commas, who don't understand how things go on in a professional football club, they think that with their large following that they can dictate what is going on. But that doesn't work like that. And in the case of Arteta, to start your journey as a professional manager at one of the biggest clubs in English football, it's a tough ask. And one thing I do find strange is the time and praise being afforded to Arteta was never afforded to Emery. And I can't understand it for the life of me, even in terms of the vocabulary that people use. When Unai Emery got Almeria promoted to the La Liga for the first time in 24 years, got Valencia into the Champions League when they were financially in dire straits, wins 3 Europa Leagues on the bounce, and is now a very conservative club and a club with a lot of potential in Villarreal. They won midweek. They're into the last 16 of the Europa League. Who knows what can happen? But for me, you can make a lot of changes at management level, but until we have an owner who leaves and somebody who comes in in building this club up brick by brick again, because we're just going around in circles, and time is ticking on. 17 years since our first since our last league title at the end of this season. Yes, we've had periods from 1953 to 1971 and 1971 to 1989 without any form of trophy. If you think it was bad now, think about then. But we've got a fan base where it's all about the clout and the reputation of a player. Oh, he's worth 50 million. He must be amazing. Nobody looks if he can dribble or pass. I'm often told by many Arsenal Twitter, I champion Mark Albrighton. Oh, he's useless, Mark Albrighton. He's useless. Mark Albrighton has done something that Lacazette, Aubameyang, Ozil couldn't do, and the likes of Odegaard and Xhaka won't, and that is win a Premier League title. And he wasn't just a passenger in that Premier League winning season. He was an important part. He was as important as Jamie Vardy and Riyad Mahrez and Wes Morgan. But yet some of our fans, oh, he's useless. He's a Premier League winner. He's a Premier League winner. And if we signed him, he might be able to teach our players and fellow fans a little bit about what it means to win a Premier League title. So it's tough times at the minute. But for me, it's just about getting through this season in one piece. And then we can evaluate and do extensive work again in the summer.
No, James, brilliantly well said. Particularly the Mark Albrighton thing. I mean, I've said it just to wrap up, but I want to say a big thank you to the guys in the chat. You make a good point, James, and Callum, you might agree, obviously, not being an Arsenal fan. One thing that sort of, I don't know when it seeped into the fan base, to be honest, in terms of Arsenal in regards to sort of snobbery towards players that are not fashionable or have beautiful Galactico names. And, you know, there are good players or quality players within the Premier League, or not even in the Premier League, domestically in the Championship or maybe in the Liga or Serie A, who will come and do a better job than some of the players we've had at Arsenal for probably 4 or 5 years. It's not about, yes, there has to be an outlay in terms of some kind of money spent, but it's about spending it smartly. It's about, like Tony Adams said, when we lost to Leicester, I think just before, you know, Unai Emery, when he was sort of on his last leg, said, look, are Arsenal actually looking at the character and of these players that we're bringing into the football club? And that's such a key thing that's stuck with me for a very long time. And just to finish up with even with the Liverpool thing, I know people talk about that and use that as a reference, but Liverpool have had some very, very good footballers and very good managers in the last 25, 30 years. And they still could not get over the line. Like James said, Arsenal have won the Premier League for 17 years. It could go another 10 years. I mean, are Arsenal fans going to wake up tomorrow morning and say, you know what, I'm not going to support the club anymore because we're not going to win a title in 10 years' time? You're not going to do that. But it's going to be a bumpy road past Mikel Arteta, to be totally honest. And like James said, with the owner, yeah, it's... Go on, James. Sorry, mate. Go on, mate.
I fully agree. And as I say, you can glean what you're ready to glean when you're ready to glean it. But I think a lot of fans, it's very much about, fans that are personalities on social media, they kind of hang on to their coattails. But the majority of these celebrity fans, they have no idea what goes on behind the scenes of a professional football club. For likes of myself and Callum, have spoken to technical directors, have spoken to agents and spoken to players and managers. So the inside information where you understand that you're dealing with a professional football club, and to change and sack a manager in the blink of an eye. And I just think at the minute we are a shadow of what we used to be. I'm not just talking about on the pitch, but years ago, in terms of, if we were well beaten at European level, it was an acceptance that they were better than us. Now it's, oh, they're a pub team, we should be beating them. Even Benfica midweek. This is a team who have won 37 Portuguese league titles, 26 Portuguese cups, and 2 European cups. And are quite clearly the biggest club in their country. I had some Arsenal fans literally disposing them as if they're like not a very good side. They're an excellent team and they're an excellent club. And I think with some of the attitude of some of our fan base, I think some of them will wake up one day and think, what have I done? Because I mean, I was very fortunate in my formative years as an Arsenal fan. The first trophy I ever saw Arsenal win was the 1993 League Cup, when Paul Merson scored and won man of the match. And then obviously the Cup Kings in 93, what happened in 94, 98. So I'm extremely lucky, but the majority of the younger fan base, they've never seen Arsenal win a league title. They've never seen Arsenal win a league title, but yet they're talking as if they've got so much clout. but it's not simply the case of clicking your fingers. And as you rightly said at the beginning of the podcast today, some of our fans, unfortunately, they support more of a player than the club.
Yeah, you're spot on, mate. Absolutely. I've thought that for quite a long time. But guys in the chat, thank you for staying with us for an hour and 54 minutes. Great chat. It's very cathartic, it felt, to be honest. I'm glad to get you two on his amazing insight from a very different perspective. Like I said, it's all good talking about blood and thunder after games and being furious, but I wanted to sort of move away from that and to get you two on as the first guest to do this sort of segment in terms of life stories and your profession and your field has been amazing. Guys, thank you in the chat for your comments and your questions. Guys, James, where can the guys find you for your on your social media and all your information, mate?
They can find me on @JamesRowe_NL. You can find my work on Football CFB and The Secret Footballer. Football CFB, Callum's website, publish a feature interview every Monday and an archive feature every Friday. And The Secret Footballer also publish one of my interviews a week every Wednesday. There's many surprises coming up, including I won't give too much away because it's always nice to give a few surprises. But yeah, you can follow me on @JamesRowe_NL. I'm always open. DMs are always open. I always try to make time for people. So if you've got any questions about Dutch football or Dutch players or even interviews that I've done, feel free to let me know. And always nice to say hello to people. And really enjoyed today. Thought it was really extensive and great to hear both sides and stories of everybody. And thank you for having me on.
No, James, it's a pleasure. I wanted to get you on for a long time, mate. I wanted to tap into your knowledge, so it's a pleasure to share the platform with you, mate. Callum, where can the guys find you, my friend?
You can follow me on Twitter @CallumCFB. I'll share my individual work there and obviously just communicate, as James has said, with fans that have got any questions. DMs are open. If you follow @FootballCFB, that's where you'll find the work of James, you'll find the work of myself and some of our other writers as well. And the website is cfbfootball.com. In terms of guests that are coming up in March, I've just announced my latest lineup today. So I've got Lubo Moravchik, John Stead, Alan Thompson, Dean Whitehead, Mark Pugac, Stig Inga Bjornaby, David Lee, Gareth Farrelly, and Paul McGuinness of Manchester United. So a big lineup of audio interviews coming in the next month. And in James's side, I know he's keeping his cards close to his chest, but I can assure you the interviews that James has got coming up are interviews you do not want to miss. And as he said, he's on Football CFB on a Monday and Friday, but don't forget to go to The Secret Footballer every Wednesday, because if you follow James's work on CFB, continue following his work elsewhere, because regardless of which platform it's on, it's always of the highest quality.
Yeah, brilliant. Guys,
no
problem. Guys in the chat, don't even think about going to follow him. Just go and do it straight away. Don't even think about it. Just do it. Their Twitter handles, guys, if you can't find them, which you should be able to find them, come and find me and you'll see I'll be tagging them and tweeting them all the time. So come and follow them and just check out their fantastic work they do. Callum, I have to say before we go, you interviewed one of my favorite fullback of all time. I was very keen to read that. Andras Bramer. For the younger generation out there, if I was to describe him in regards to any English players, I would say he would have been the equivalent of a Stuart Pearce, but a better footballer.
He was explosive, and he was a footballer who had an interesting backstory. Obviously, he won the World Cup, which is an incredible achievement, but he also played. He played in Italy, he played in Spain, he played in his native Germany. So he's someone who was a great guy to have an opportunity to speak to. He won the Bundesliga at Kaiserslautern, which for those fans that will seem like a distant memory. So he's a guy who was very interesting. And as I said earlier, Albert and James has said too, if you work hard, you treat your next interview as the most important, and you grow organically rather than chasing it. These interviews, these moments could come your way as well. It's never going to be easy, but believe in yourself, because the only person that can stop you is you.
Fantastic words, mate. Guys, as you know, I am the host, Albert JTV. As you know, my YouTube channel, my Twitter handle, AUMO57. Don't even think about it. Just come and check me out regardless. So, You guys, you see the details at the bottom of the screen. That is Albert JTV over and out. Life stories. Time to depart. Thanks, guys.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.